This was submitted by Reddit user Lemon Goodness. It gets closer every time I talk about it. I shouldn't be posting this. I don't know what will happen when I hit the submit button, but I'm pretty sure it won't be good. I'm at my wit's end and I really need the help. There's something following me. Actually, it's not so much following, more like standing there all the time. And every time I talk about it, it gets closer. The first time I saw it, I was out camping in Arizona with a few buddies. Middle of the desert kind of thing. We do it every spring, just a few guys drinking and smoking together in the silence and emptiness of our dear flatlands. Usually, the only thing we have to worry about is shit that can sting or bite, like snakes and spiders and scorpions. But on our first night there, I passed out drunk in our tent and woke up at the ass crack of dawn with the bladder so full I thought it might explode. I was still a bit drunk, so I struggled to get out, but I eventually made it to the first cactus I could find. We only pee on cacti while we're camping there. It's a thing, don't ask. I started walking up a bit more as I emptied my bladder, and I realized that the sun was about to rise, so I looked towards the horizon to see it. The sky was that weird navy color that dips into orange where it meets the land. I looked at the silhouettes of cacti and rocks in the distance, bleary-eyed, barely hanging onto my Johnson. And that's when I saw it. It was really, really, really far, but still close enough that I could tell it was a human-ish form. For reference, it was maybe 8 blocks away, far enough to be the size of an apple seed held at an arm's length. It looked like a girl standing there, just watching me, without moving. I instantly felt creeped out and hurried to get my junk back in the safety of my pants. Since I was still kinda drunk, I figured I just must be seeing things, and so I rubbed my eyes and squinted, but it was still there, in the same spot, looking the same. I must have spent a good 10 minutes just staring at it like an idiot, trying to make sense of it. I managed to convince myself that it was a cactus that probably just so happened to be shaped like a girl, so I went back to the tent to sleep off some more liquor. And when I woke up later that day, I mentioned it to my friend Leo, who was sharing my tent. We both laughed at how dumb our brain is on alcohol and got out to help the others make breakfast. Deep down, I was convinced I imagined everything, but I still glanced at the spot where the thing stood earlier that morning, just to check, maybe to reaffirm that it was indeed just a cactus. But the thing was still there, and it definitely wasn't a cactus. I could barely make out the silhouette, but it looked like a naked, pale body with long, dark hair. I froze. My whole body felt like it was both on fire and freezing cold. I elbowed Leo as he walked by me. I managed to whisper a weak, "It's still there." "What?" I swallowed, my eyes fixed on the thing. "It's still there. Look." I pointed it in its direction. Leo turned to the horizon and put a hand over his eyes, searching. "Where?" "Right there." I was growing impatient. Sure, it was far, but it stuck out like a sore thumb in the empty desert. As I watched Leo trying hard to pinpoint what it was that I was pointing at, it dawned on me that he really couldn't see it. I turned to my other friends and asked them if they could, and they all just stared into the distance, dumbfounded. That's when I knew I was fucked. At first, I decided to play it off like I was messing with them. I tried to act normal as we grilled some bacon and eggs over the fire, but I couldn't stop myself from turning around every few minutes to see if it was still there. And it was. Always. After a while, another one of my friends asked me if I was okay. I was sweating bullets even though the morning air still had a chill from last night. I felt like I was on the verge of going nuts. If nobody could see that girl but me, I must be losing my mind, right? I mean, I felt like if I acknowledged it, it would lose it for good, so I tried really hard to ignore it and distract myself. Eventually, Leo pulled me aside. "What's going on, dude? You look terrible. Are you still seeing it?" I glanced at it, then nodded yes. "Did you have some of the shrooms Jay bought last night?" I hadn't. At least, I don't remember taking any. But, man, what if I'd taken some when I was super drunk and I just didn't remember it? I clung to the idea like a lifeline. Do you think I'm just having a bad trip?" Leo shrugged. "Could be. Why don't you just go to sleep it off in the tent for a while?" I felt a huge rush of relief. I mean, this was the logical explanation I was looking for. I agreed to lie down in the tent and even managed to conk out for a good something like 3 hours. When I woke up, I felt much better. I told myself I wouldn't look. Of course, it wouldn't be there. It had all been a bad reaction to some shit I shouldn't have taken, but I didn't need to look to confirm it. Still, of course I looked. And it was still there. Still fucking there. It even looked slightly closer. Ever so slightly. I could swear it had been right next to a rock. But now, it was a few steps further. The thought that it might have moved just broke me somehow. All I remember is mumbling that I had to go see it for myself. I started walking towards it. I didn't know how long I walked until I realized that I wasn't getting any closer. I stopped and looked back. My buddies were looking at me, confused and slightly worried. I'd made it a good block away from them now. I was definitely advancing, but the thing was the same distance from me, as if it had floated away as I got closer. I lost it. I started running towards it. I ran and ran until I felt my breath burn in my throat, until my shirt was completely soaked with sweat, but the thing was still the same distance from me no matter what. My friends caught up to me and had to drag me back. I kept talking about the thing, saying it was watching me. I was delirious. Eventually, Leo decided to drive me back to the city and get me to a hospital. In the ER, they were convinced I was high and dehydrated, so they hooked me up to some saline drip and let me sleep for a couple of hours before they released me. When they did, I actually felt better, and I couldn't see the thing anymore, so I figured they must have been right. I made Leo promise not to talk about it again, and he didn't. Not for a while. In fact, nobody mentioned it for a long time. Everything went back to normal, and I just assumed I had a bad time with some shrooms in the desert. Fast forward 6 months later, I was hanging out with my friends at a bar not far from my place. We just met a group of girls that seemed pretty cool, and one of them asked us stories about our craziest nights out, and all my friends turned to me with a smirk. At that point, the whole thing had just happened long enough ago that I felt pretty comfortable just getting out there and laughing about it. Like, remember that time I got so drunk and high I saw a creepy thing staring at me in the distance? So, I told the story. With some enhancements, of course, while my friends chipped in with their side of the story too. The girls just loved it, and it soon became a running gag all through the night. Like, hey Hav, does that girl over there look like the thing you saw? Or, let's get another round. I'm not seeing any creepy shit in the distance drunk yet. We closed the bar, taking one last shot for the road. A few of my buddies left with some of the girls, but I really hadn't hit it off with anyone in particular, so I decided to walk home by myself. I was walking in the empty city streets, hands in my pockets, minding my own business. I tend to look down at my feet when I walk, deep in my thoughts, but I lifted my head at the first intersection to see if I could cross safely. And I saw it. It was closer. So much closer. Maybe a block and a half away. I could see it in more detail this time. Tall, lanky, pale, naked. I couldn't tell if it was a she or he or whatever. There were no breasts where there should have been, and no genitalia either. It looked like a sickly Ken doll that had melted a bit in the sun, with long black hair covering most of its face, hanging limply past the shoulders. I stopped breathing. My heart was beating so hard I thought my ribs would pop out. I didn't move at first. I think I was afraid that it would start chasing me if I ran, like a goddamn bear. I didn't know the rules. I didn't even know what it was or what it wanted or even if it was real. I knew for sure I hadn't had any fucking shrooms this time. So I just stood there, like I had that one morning in the desert, just looking at it. I could hear my breathing in the quiet of the night, heavy, panting. When they say fear can paralyze you, they're not kidding. I told myself, fuck it, just run. But my legs wouldn't listen. I had to repeat it 1,000,000 times before I finally turned around and started running. And I ran the fastest I had ever ran in my life, away from it this time. I made it to a little park nearby and finally dared to look back. It wasn't there anymore, so I slowed to a stop and tried to catch my breath. I scanned the street. Nothing. So I turned back around trying to decide which way I should take home, and there it was. At about the same distance from me, partially obscured by a tree. Because that's what this fucking thing does. It moves, but never when you're looking, and it always at the same distance no matter how much you try to run away from it or run at it. Look away, look back, and it might be gone, but it's not. It'll be behind you or to the right, wherever the fuck it pleases, just to scare the shit out of you. It's circling you like a lion, waiting. Somehow, I made it home that night and locked the door, rammed the table against it for good measure, and I went to bed and eventually managed to fall asleep. In the morning, I hoped it had all been a bad dream. I spent a few hours freaking out about it, wondering what was wrong with me before I finally had the guts to venture out again. I looked for it this time. I realize now that if I had looked for it before, when it was farther, I might have spotted it. It was just harder to see in the city, without a clear line of sight. I don't think it ever left since that morning in the desert. And it was right there, the same distance as the night before. Standing amongst a bunch of people walking around, getting coffee, hailing cabs, running for the bus. Nobody could see it but me. So I went back inside and called Leo. He drove me to urgent care and we begged the doctor to give me a brain MRI or whatever we needed to figure out if there was something wrong with my head. He agreed to give me a bunch of blood tests and even an MRI on the condition that I see a shrink. I looked at my feet the whole time Leo drove me home. He kept asking me if I could see it, but I didn't want to check. I could feel that it was there, like electricity on my skin, pressure on my neck, as if its eyes were boring into me at all times. I hadn't even seen its eyes. For all I know, it doesn't even have eyes behind all that matted hair. Before I went back into my apartment building, Leo convinced me to check. just in case. I glanced very quickly forward, but didn't see it. Then I looked to my right, and there it was. And yeah, it was even closer. I just closed my eyes and ran back to my apartment. The doctor prescribed me some sleeping pills, so I took a couple of those and stayed in bed until my appointment with the shrink a few days later. Leo texted me a few times to check on me, but I didn't feel like talking. I wish I had just talked about it even less back then, but back then I didn't know how it worked. The shrink was useless, just as I had expected. He tried to find all sorts of childhood trauma to pin this on, then was clearly trying to see if I was a schizophrenic without saying it outright. He had me describe the thing multiple times in great detail, then prescribed me some more pills and told me to come back the week after. I managed to make my way back home with an Uber, just looking at my feet. When I got into my apartment, I glanced out the window. I hadn't been able to see the thing from the window before because I can't see very far down the street from my vantage point. But this time, the thing was right there, standing in the middle of the street, not moving, and so much closer. That's when it dawned on me that it gets closer every time I fucking talk about it. So I tested it. I texted Leo and told him about my appointment with the shrink. I mentioned the thing a few times, described it again just to make sure, and then I looked out the window. It had moved closer, a good 5 feet. I felt my muscles seize. I turned off my phone and took a bunch of more sleeping pills. Then I closed the curtains of every window and covered them with blankets and bed sheets. I stopped going out and got fired from my job. I didn't go back to the shrink or the doctor. I stopped responding to my friends and family because they'd inevitably ask what was wrong, and I just couldn't tell them. I couldn't talk about it, or it would get closer. I've been surviving on food I buy at the convenience store downstairs, never looking up from my damn 2 feet. The clerk thinks I'm crazy. He actually told me so. I can't keep on living like this. I haven't even talked about the thing for 4 months. I don't know what will happen after I post this. It's a huge risk, but I just don't know what else to do. Please, if you know what this thing is, or how to get rid of it, please, I'm begging you, tell me. I'm begging you. I don't know what will happen if it gets close enough to touch me. I don't know.